After the surgery, I left a message for my parents. I'm still in the hospital. I need help with the kids for a few days. My mom replied, "We're not your emergency babysitters." I reread the message twice. Then I stopped paying the insurance policy I had for them. They called when the insurance disappeared. The message from my mom came while I was still lying in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and trying to ignore the ache in my stomach. "We're not your emergency babysitters." That was it. One sentence. I read it twice because at first I thought maybe I misunderstood something. 30 minutes earlier I had sent a simple message. I'm still in the hospital. I need help with the kids for a few days. Nothing dramatic. No begging. Just the truth. My husband Jake was in Seattle for work and his return flight wasn't until the weekend. The surgery had been sudden. What started as stomach pain turned into emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix. Everything happened fast. Ambulance, operating room, recovery. Now I was stuck in a hospital bed with 2 small kids at home. Emma was 6. Liam was 4. And the only thing my parents had to say was that they weren't my babysitters. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. For a moment I actually wondered if maybe they were joking. But my parents didn't joke like that. They had always been very clear about one thing. They didn't like inconvenience. Growing up, everything had conditions. If they helped with something, it always came with reminders later. If they gave money, they brought it up for years. Even when I got married, my mom once said something at dinner that stuck with me. "Having kids is your decision. Don't expect us to raise them." At the time I laughed because it sounded like one of her usual dramatic comments. But now, lying in that hospital bed, I realized she meant every word. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. Then the door opened. A nurse walked in with a chart and smiled. "How are you feeling, Olivia?" "Sore," I said. "That's expected. Surgery went well. You just need rest." Rest. I almost laughed. My kids were home with the neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez, who had picked them up from daycare after I called her from the ambulance. She was kind, but she was 72 years old. I couldn't leave 2 little tornadoes with her for days. I picked up my phone again. For a second I considered replying to my mom. Something angry. Something honest. But I didn't. Instead I typed a different message. Jake's parents. Tom and Carol. "I'm so sorry to ask this. I'm in the hospital after emergency surgery. Jake is out of town. Could you possibly help with Emma and Liam for a few days?" I hesitated before pressing send. They lived 40 minutes away. It was a lot to ask. But within 2 minutes my phone buzzed. "Of course we can." Carol wrote. "We're already getting dressed. Send us the address." I felt something in my chest loosen. Then another message came. "And don't worry about anything. We'll take care of the kids." For the first time since the surgery I felt like I could actually breathe. An hour later Carol walked into my hospital room carrying a paper bag and a bouquet of bright yellow flowers. Behind her was Tom with a stuffed dinosaur and a coloring book. "We brought supplies," Tom said. Carol put the flowers on the table. "The kids are fine," she said. "They're excited about a sleepover at Grandma and Grandpa's house." I didn't even realize I was crying until Carol handed me a tissue. "You focus on healing," she said. "Everything else is handled." I nodded. And in that moment something became very clear to me. My parents hadn't asked if I was okay. They hadn't asked about the surgery. They hadn't asked about their grandchildren. But that wasn't even the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me was something else. Something I hadn't thought about in years. A payment that left my bank account every single month. A payment that kept my parents comfortable. And suddenly, lying there in that hospital bed, staring at the flowers Carol had brought, I realized something strange. If I stopped making that payment, my parents would notice very quickly. And for the first time in my life, I seriously considered doing exactly that. Because the truth was, my parents hadn't actually needed me as a daughter for a very long time. They only needed me as a bank account. And I had been paying for that privilege for 6 years. But that night, in the quiet hospital room, I started wondering what would happen if the payments suddenly disappeared. Most people didn't know about the payments. Not even Jake at first. 6 years earlier my dad had called me late one evening and said he needed help. His small contracting business had collapsed after a partner walked away with most of the money. There were debts, medical bills, and the house mortgage that suddenly became impossible to keep up with. At the time I was still trying to be the daughter who fixed things. I had a good job as a project manager and we had some savings. Jake and I talked about it and decided to help temporarily. Temporary turned into permanent very quickly. First it was the mortgage, then their health insurance, then a monthly transfer because my dad said they were struggling with groceries and utilities. Eventually everything got bundled into one payment that quietly left my bank account every month. $3,000. My parents never called it help. They called it support. And every time I visited, my mom reminded me how stressful life had become for them. Your father shouldn't have to worry about finances at his age. We worked hard our whole lives. Family should take care of each other. At some point the conversations stopped being conversations. They became expectations. The strange part was that they never asked how we were doing financially. They never asked if it was difficult with 2 kids. They never offered to help with anything. Not once. Still, every month the payment went out automatically. Until I was lying in that hospital bed. That evening after Tom and Carol left, I opened my banking app. The transfer was scheduled for the next morning. $3,000. For a moment I stared at the screen. Then I tapped the payment. Cancel recurring transfer. The app asked if I was sure. I pressed confirm. The screen went back to the main page like nothing had happened. No dramatic music. No alarms. Just silence. I put the phone down and slept for the first time since the surgery. The next few days were strange. Carol and Tom visited every day. They brought updates about the kids, snacks from home, and random little things Emma and Liam wanted me to see. One afternoon Carol handed me Emma's drawing. It was a stick figure family holding hands. Emma had labeled everyone. Emma, Liam, Grandma Carol, Grandpa. There was a space where another figure might have been. But there wasn't one. My parents had never visited them enough to make it into the drawing. On the 3rd day I was discharged. Jake had managed to get an earlier flight home, but Tom insisted on picking me up from the hospital. Doctor's orders, he said. No lifting, no stress. Carol had already set up our house with groceries and meals. When I walked inside, everything smelled like chicken soup and fresh bread. Emma and Liam ran toward me like I had been gone for months. That night, after the kids went to bed, Jake sat next to me on the couch. You told your parents what happened? Yeah. And? I showed him the message. He read it slowly. Then he just shook his head. They really said that? Yep. He didn't say anything else, but I could tell he was angry. Then he asked something that made me pause. Did they at least check on you after? I looked at my phone. No calls. No messages. Nothing. Guess not, I said. Jake leaned back on the couch. I'll never understand them. I didn't answer. But in the back of my mind I knew something Jake didn't. The bank transfer should have gone through 2 days earlier, which meant my parents had already checked their account. And if they were paying attention they had already noticed something missing. $3,000 missing. So my phone stayed quiet. Until the following afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea when the screen lit up. Dad calling. I stared at the name for a moment. It was the first time either of them had called since my surgery. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. Hello. My dad didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the surgery. The first thing he said was something else entirely. Olivia, something happened with the insurance payment. And just like that, I knew exactly why he had finally decided to call. For a moment I didn't answer. I just sat there at the kitchen table holding the phone while my dad waited. Olivia, he said again. Did you hear me? I heard you. Good. Because the insurance company sent a notice this morning. The payment didn't go through. Of course that was the first thing he noticed. Not the surgery. Not the hospital. Not the fact that his daughter had been lying on an operating table 3 days earlier. Just the missing payment. I looked at the tea in my cup. I canceled it. Silence. Then he laughed a little like I had made some kind of joke. What do you mean canceled it? I stopped the payments. Another pause. This one longer. Why would you do that? I leaned back in the chair. I was in the hospital. Yes, your mother mentioned something about that. Mentioned something. That was how my emergency surgery had been summarized. I asked you for help with the kids. My dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I are very busy right now. Busy. Retired for 7 years and somehow still too busy. So you can't help with the kids, I said. It's not that simple. But the insurance payments are simple? Another silence. Then his voice changed slightly. Olivia, we rely on that. I know. You can't just stop it without telling us. I almost laughed. You didn't tell me you weren't coming when I needed help either. My dad didn't answer that. Instead, he said something that made the whole conversation even stranger. You need to restart the payment today. Not please. Not can we talk about this. Just an order. That was the moment I realized something important. They weren't calling because they cared. They were calling because the money stopped. And for the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel guilty about it. I'll think about it, I said. Then I hung up. The phone started ringing again less than a minute later. This time it was my mom. I let the phone ring for a while before answering. When I finally picked up, my mom skipped any kind of greeting. Your father says you stopped the insurance payment. That's right. You can't do that, Olivia. Her tone sounded like I had forgotten to take out the trash. Not like I had been in surgery 4 days earlier. I waited a second to see if she would ask anything else. He didn't. So, I said, you heard I was in the hospital? Yes. Your father mentioned it. That was apparently the full extent of their concern. I had emergency surgery. I'm sure the doctors handled it. Handled it. I almost laughed again. My appendix ruptured. Well, you're home now, aren't you? I looked around the kitchen. Jake was upstairs helping the kids with pajamas. Carol had dropped off another container of soup earlier that afternoon. My parents hadn't even asked where the kids were. They're staying with Tom and Carol sometimes while I recover, I said. Oh. Just that. No curiosity. No appreciation. Then she returned to the subject she actually cared about. You need to turn the payments back on. The insurance company already warned us about late coverage. I canceled the transfer. You can restart it. I could. Another pause. Then do it. For the first time in the entire conversation, something inside me snapped into place. 6 years of quiet payments. 6 years of pretending this arrangement was normal. 6 years of listening to them complain about things I was paying for. And when I needed help for 3 days with their grandchildren, they said they weren't babysitters. I won't be restarting it, I said. She didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for. Why are you doing this to us? I stared at the wall for a moment. Because when I was lying in a hospital bed after surgery, the only thing you told me was that you weren't my babysitter. That's not the same thing. It kind of is. Her voice sharpened. We raised you for 18 years. I know. You owe us some support. That sentence stayed in the air between us. Finally, I said something very simple. I don't owe you $3,000 a month. The silence that followed felt different this time. Heavier. Then she said something that surprised me. Your father and I will come over this weekend. We'll talk about this properly. Not ask. Announce. We'll see, I said. And then I ended the call. Upstairs I could hear Liam laughing about something Jake said. For a moment I just sat there listening to the noise of my own house. A house that suddenly felt a little lighter. But 2 days later my parents showed up anyway. And they didn't come alone. They came to dinner. They arrived Saturday evening like nothing had happened. My mom walked into the house carrying a bottle of wine. My dad followed behind her looking around like he was inspecting the place. Nice to see you're up and moving again, he said. That was the closest thing to asking about my surgery. Jake opened the door for them, but I could tell he wasn't thrilled. He had heard every phone call. The dinner wasn't even my idea. Tom and Carol had suggested it after I told them my parents wanted to talk. They said it might be easier if everyone just sat down together. So the table was full. Jake and I, Tom and Carol, my parents. Emma and Liam had already eaten and were upstairs watching a movie. At first everything felt oddly polite. Carol asked about my recovery. Tom asked Jake about work. Jake asked my dad about his golf games. My parents played along like this was a completely normal family dinner. Like nothing had happened. Then my mom did something strange. She turned to Carol and said, "Thank you for helping Olivia while she was in the hospital. We were very worried about her." I slowly looked up from my plate. Worried. Tom nodded politely. "We were glad to help." My dad added, "Family has to step up in situations like that." I felt Jake shift slightly in his chair. My mom kept going. "We were calling Olivia every day to make sure she was okay." That was the moment something inside me finally broke. I had been quiet all evening trying to keep things calm, but hearing that lie at my own table was too much. I put my fork down. No, you weren't. The room went quiet. My mom looked at me. What? You didn't call me every day. She laughed a little. Olivia, you must have forgotten. I didn't forget. My dad cleared his throat. Maybe we missed a day or two. You didn't call once. Now everyone at the table was completely silent. Tom and Carol looked confused. Jake didn't say anything. My mom shook her head like I was being dramatic. Olivia, that's not important right now. What matters is fixing the insurance situation. There was the real reason for the dinner. I slowly stood up from the table. You want to talk about that? My dad nodded. Yes. We need to resolve it. I looked around the table. Then I looked at Tom and Carol. They took my kids the same night I went to the hospital. Both of them looked surprised I was saying it out loud. They visited me every day. Carol tried to interrupt. Olivia, it's okay. But I kept going. They cooked meals. They cleaned the house. They helped with the kids while Jake was out of town. Then I turned toward my parents. You didn't visit once. My mom crossed her arms. We were giving you space to recover. No, I said. You weren't. The room felt tense now. My dad leaned forward slightly. This is unnecessary. We came here to fix a financial misunderstanding. That sentence made Jake laugh quietly. But I wasn't finished yet. Because there was one more thing my parents didn't realize. They thought this dinner was about money. But for me it wasn't. Not anymore. And the next thing I said made the entire table go silent again. I looked at my parents and said the thing I should have said years ago. I'm not restarting the payments. My mom blinked like she hadn't heard me correctly. What? The insurance. The monthly transfers. All of it. My dad leaned back in his chair. Olivia, you're being emotional. You just had surgery. No. I'm being clear. My mom shook her head. You can't just cut us off. I can. The room stayed quiet. Tom and Carol didn't say anything. Jake was watching my parents carefully. My dad tried again. We rely on that money. I know you do. Then why would you stop it? Because that was the question they kept repeating. Why? Not how are you? Not why didn't you tell us you were struggling? Just why would you stop paying? So I answered honestly. Because when I asked for help with the kids while I was in the hospital, you said you weren't babysitters. My mom waved her hand. You're holding on to one message. It told me everything. My dad sighed. This is childish. No, I said. It's overdue. Then I turned toward Tom and Carol. They were there. Every day. Carol tried to protest again. Olivia, you don't have to. But I finished the sentence anyway. They helped because they care about us. Not because they expected something in return. Then I looked back at my parents. You only called when the money disappeared. My mom opened her mouth but didn't say anything. For the first time that evening, neither of them had a response. Finally, my dad stood up. So that's it? You're abandoning your parents. I almost laughed at the word. Abandoning. I asked you for 3 days of help. My mom grabbed her purse. You'll regret this. Maybe she expected me to panic. Maybe she thought I would apologize. Instead, I walked to the front door and opened it. If the only reason you come here is money, I said, then there's no reason to come at all. They stood there for a moment. Then they left. The door closed. The house felt quiet again. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then Tom said something simple. You didn't have to do that for us. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for myself. Jake walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. Upstairs, Liam was laughing again at whatever movie they were watching. Life was still moving. Over the next few weeks my parents tried calling, then texting, then leaving long voicemails about responsibility and family loyalty. Eventually the calls stopped. The insurance stayed canceled. The transfer stayed gone. And something else happened too. For the first time in years, my bank account started growing instead of shrinking. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was something I realized slowly over time. Sometimes the people who give you life are not the ones who actually stand beside you when things fall apart. Sometimes the real family is the one that shows up without being asked twice. And once you see the difference, it's impossible to unsee it. My parents never met Emma and Liam again. But Tom and Carol never missed a single birthday, school play, or soccer game. And honestly, my kids never asked why the other grandparents stopped coming around.